The police were already in the driveway when I got the call. That's how I knew something was wrong. My phone rang while I was halfway across town, and the moment I saw my neighbor's name pop up, I picked it up immediately. He didn't waste time with small talk. "They're at your grandpa's house," he said. "HOA called the cops." For a second, I thought I misheard him. "The cops? On my grandpa?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "You need to get here." I didn't ask anything else. I just turned the car around and drove. Fast. Because if there was one thing I knew about my grandfather, it was this. He didn't cause problems. At 74, he spent most of his time on the front porch, fixing small things around the house, talking to neighbors, and minding his own business. He had lived there longer than most of the people in that HOA had even owned their homes, so if police were standing in his driveway, this wasn't normal. When I pulled up, I saw them immediately. Two patrol cars parked near the curb, lights off but presence obvious. A small group had gathered nearby, neighbors watching from a distance, the way people always do when something unusual happens. And right there, standing near the walkway like she owned the entire street, was her. Arms crossed, expression firm, waiting. I stepped out of the car and walked straight toward the officers. "What's going on?" I asked. One of them turned to me. "We received a call regarding a property violation and a resident refusing to comply," he said. I glanced at her. "Let me guess," I said quietly. "From her?" She didn't deny it. "Your grandfather has been repeatedly violating HOA standards," she said. "We've issued notices. He's ignored them." I looked back at the officer. "He's not part of the HOA," I said. That should have been enough, but it wasn't. She stepped forward immediately. "That's incorrect," she said. "This property falls under our jurisdiction." I shook my head. "No, it doesn't. He owned this house before your HOA even existed." "That doesn't exempt him," she replied sharply. "The entire neighborhood is under compliance rules." The officer looked between us, clearly trying to figure out what was actually going on. "Ma'am," he said, "do you have documentation showing the property is part of the HOA?" She hesitated, just for a second, then said, "We've sent multiple notices." "That's not documentation," he replied. That slowed her down, but it didn't stop her. "He's refusing to respond," she added, pointing toward the house. "And he's been warned." I followed her gesture and looked at the front door. Closed. Quiet. That was the part that bothered me the most, because my grandfather always answered the door. Always. "You spoke to him today?" I asked. "No," she said. "He's been avoiding us." That didn't sound right, not even close. I stepped past them and walked up the path toward the front porch. The officers didn't stop me. They just watched. Even they seemed unsure now, like they were starting to question whether this call should have been made in the first place. I knocked on the door, once, then again, a little louder. For a second, nothing happened. Then I heard movement inside. Slow, measured, not rushed. The sound of someone walking toward the door. Behind me, everything went quiet. No one talking, no one moving, just waiting. The handle turned. The door opened. And the moment it did, everything changed. Because the officers didn't speak, didn't move, didn't even react the way you'd expect. They just went silent. Completely. When the door opened, my grandfather didn't look surprised. That was the first thing that stood out. He stood there calm, steady, one hand still resting lightly on the door, like he had been expecting someone but not necessarily this. His posture was straight, not stiff, just naturally composed, the way people carry themselves when they've spent a lifetime not needing to prove anything to anyone. But it wasn't just him. It was what happened next. The moment the officers saw his face clearly, something shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way most people would notice right away, but enough. Enough to make the air feel different. One of them blinked, like he needed a second to be sure. Then he took a small step forward. "Sir, is that you?" he asked. That wasn't how officers usually talk to someone they've been called on. That wasn't routine. That was recognition. My grandfather looked at him for a second, then gave a slight nod. "It's been a while," he said. The second officer straightened immediately, his entire posture changing. The casual stance was gone, replaced by something more formal, more respectful, like a switch had flipped without anyone needing to say it out loud. I turned slightly, looking between them, trying to understand what I was missing. Because clearly, I was missing something. "You okay?" the first officer asked him. My grandfather nodded. "I'm fine," he said calmly. Behind me, I could feel her presence shift. Karen hadn't moved closer, but she wasn't relaxed anymore. The confidence she walked in with was starting to slip, replaced by something else. Not fear exactly, but uncertainty. "What's going on here?" my grandfather asked, looking past the officers toward her. "She reported a violation," I said. "Claims you're part of the HOA." That was all it took. He didn't react dramatically, didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. He just looked at her for a long second, then said, "No, I'm not." Simple, direct, final. But the difference now was, he wasn't just saying it. The officers already believed it. Karen stepped forward quickly, trying to regain control before it slipped too far. "You've been ignoring compliance notices," she said. "Your property doesn't meet community standards." My grandfather shifted his weight slightly, still calm, still steady. "This property was here before your community existed," he replied. "That doesn't matter," she shot back. "You're affecting the neighborhood." One of the officers turned toward her, and this time his tone wasn't neutral anymore. "Ma'am," he said, "we're going to need to see proof that this property is under HOA authority." There it was again. Proof. Not claims, not confidence. Proof. She hesitated longer this time. "We have records," she said. "Do you have them with you?" he asked. "No," she replied. The officer nodded slowly. "Then right now, we don't have anything showing he's required to comply." That was the moment everything started to fall apart for her. Because now the situation wasn't being driven by her anymore. It was being controlled by facts, and she didn't have any. "This is a civil enforcement issue," she said, trying to push back. "He's been notified multiple times." My grandfather spoke again, calm as ever. "I've thrown every one of them away." I almost smiled, because that line landed exactly the way it needed to. The second officer looked at him, then back at her. "If he's not part of your HOA, those notices don't apply," he said. She opened her mouth to argue again, but this time there was hesitation behind it. "He's within the area." "Ma'am," the first officer interrupted, firmer now. "Area doesn't equal authority." That ended that argument. Silence followed. Not tense, not chaotic, just quiet, because the situation had already shifted, completely. I looked at my grandfather again, trying to understand what had caused that initial reaction from the officers. He hadn't explained anything. He hadn't shown anything. But somehow the moment they saw him, everything changed. "You know them?" I asked quietly. He glanced at me briefly. "Different time," he said. "Same job." That didn't fully explain it, but it was enough to understand one thing. He wasn't just some random elderly man answering the door. He had history, and that history mattered. Karen tried one last time, stepping forward slightly, her voice tighter now. "This isn't over," she said. "We'll escalate this." The first officer looked at her, not aggressively, but clearly. "You can follow up through proper channels," he said. "But based on what we're seeing right now, there's no violation we can enforce." That was it. Official, clear, done. Her authority in that moment, gone. Completely. She looked like she wanted to argue more, like she was searching for something to say that would pull the situation back under her control, but there was nothing left. No proof, no support, no leverage. After a few seconds, she stepped back. Not dramatically, just enough to show she knew this wasn't going her way anymore. The officers turned back toward my grandfather. "If there's anything else, let us know," one of them said. He nodded. "Appreciate it." And just like that, the tone was no longer about enforcement, it was about respect. The kind that doesn't get given lightly. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you're talking to. As the officers started walking back toward their cars, I stood there for a second, letting everything settle. Then I looked at my grandfather again. "You want to tell me what that was about?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He just looked out toward the street, toward her, toward the situation that had just collapsed in front of him. Then he said something simple. "Some people forget where lines are," he said. And judging by the way she walked away, she had just been reminded. For the rest of that day, everything went quiet again. The police left, the neighbors slowly drifted back to their homes, and the tension that had built up in the driveway faded into something calmer. But it wasn't over. Not really. Because the way she walked away told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't done. She was just regrouping. That night, I sat with my grandfather on the porch, the same place he'd spent years watching the neighborhood change around him. The HOA houses came later, newer builds, tighter rules, more control. His place had always been different, older, simpler, untouched by all of that. "You knew those officers," I said finally. He didn't look at me right away. He just kept his eyes on the street, like he was thinking about something from a long time ago. Not them specifically, he said, but I knew the job, and the people who do it. That's it? I asked. He gave a small smile. That's enough. I could tell there was more to it, but he wasn't the type to explain himself unless it mattered. And right now, it didn't. What mattered was what had happened today, and what might happen next. We didn't have to wait long. The next morning, a letter showed up. Official looking, stamped with the HOA name, just like before. But this time it wasn't a fine. It was a notice of formal review and enforcement consideration. Different words, same idea. They were trying one more time, just from another angle. I read it once, then handed it to my grandfather. He skimmed it, then handed it back without much reaction. They're reaching, he said. Yeah, I replied. But they're not stopping. He nodded once. Then we will. That was all he said. No plan, no explanation, just certainty. Later that afternoon, they showed up again. Not just her this time, 3 people total. Her and 2 other HOA board members. They stayed at the edge of the property, just like before, but the difference was obvious. The board members looked cautious, like they were there to observe more than act. She, on the other hand, still carried that same edge, even if it wasn't as strong as before. We're here to resolve this, she said. My grandfather stood up from his chair slowly, steady as ever, and walked toward them. I stayed a step behind, watching. There's nothing to resolve, he said calmly. One of the board members spoke up, his tone much more measured. Sir, we're not claiming you're part of the HOA, he said, but your property impacts the surrounding community, and we have to address that. My grandfather looked at him for a moment, then nodded slightly. And what authority gives you that right? He asked. The board member hesitated. Just enough. Community guidelines, he said. My grandfather shook his head once. Guidelines aren't law, he replied. Silence followed, because again, they had nothing solid to stand on. Karen stepped forward, trying to push past that hesitation. You're affecting property values, she said. We can't ignore that. My grandfather looked directly at her, his expression calm but firm. You can't control what you don't own, he said. That landed. Hard. Because now it wasn't just about documents or rules, it was about something simpler, boundaries, real ones. The board members exchanged a glance. I could see it clearly now. They weren't fully on her side anymore. They were weighing risk, trying to figure out how far they wanted to go with this. She called the police yesterday, I added, on a property she doesn't control. That changed the tone even more. Because now it wasn't just an argument, it was a liability. We weren't aware of that, one of the board members said quietly. My grandfather nodded slightly. Now you are. Karen turned toward them, clearly frustrated. He's refusing to comply, she said. We can't just let that go. The second board member shook his head. We also can't enforce something that doesn't apply, he replied. That was it. That was the moment it finally broke. Because once the people behind her stopped supporting her, there was nothing left. No authority, no leverage, no control. She looked between all of us, like she was trying to hold on to something that was already gone, but it was too late. We'll review this internally, one of the board members said, already stepping back. They turned and walked away. She stood there for a second longer, like she was deciding whether to say something else, whether to push one more time. But she didn't. She turned and followed them. And just like that, it was over. A few days later, we heard what happened next. There had been a meeting, closed, internal. And by the end of it, she wasn't the president anymore. No announcement, no explanation, just replaced. Because even the HOA understood something she didn't. You can push rules. You can push pressure. But the moment you step outside your authority, it stops being enforcement. It becomes a problem, a real one. As for my grandfather, nothing changed. He went back to his routine, sitting on the porch, fixing things around the house, living the same way he always had. The neighborhood kept moving, the HOA kept operating, but none of it touched his property anymore. And every now and then, I'd think back to that moment when the door opened, when the officers went silent without anyone needing to explain why. Because sometimes, you don't need to say who you are. People already know. How did you like the story? Please comment and like, subscribe, and share my YouTube channel for more interesting HOA stories.